new report reveals the spending by trial lawyers on state elected officials. In 2014, 79% of New York State legislators received campaign contributions from the Lawyers Political Action Committee. So what does that all mean? My next guest now is going to be discussing this report. It's Tom Stebbins, Executive Director of the Lawsuit Reform Alliance. So, Tom, this is fascinating because you guys have tracked just how much money has really not just poured into campaign contributions over the last several years, but just in the last really 5 years from 2010 till now, looking at, or 2010 to 2014, just how much money they've been pouring into lobbying.
That's right,
as well.
And we've seen a steady increase in lobbying each year, over 50% increase since 2010. And it's not just the political action contributions, but also the lobbying expenditures, as you mentioned, as well as the outside income that got Speaker Silver in trouble, and frankly, many other legislators still make outside income.
A trial lawyer himself, somebody
Sure.
who worked for Whites and Luxembourg, which was obviously a law firm that was heavily involved in personal injury cases as well.
Absolutely, and a lot of people might think that because Speaker Silver was arrested, that the trial lawyers' dominance over Albany has ended, but they increased their spending in 2014 by 27%, so they're continuing to put money in the pockets of Albany politicians.
Okay, but to be fair and to play devil's advocate, they're just one voice in Albany right now. You've got say, for instance, the statewide teachers union spending a lot of money on
Sure.
lobbying and campaign contributions. You've got very wealthy real estate interests paying a lot of money to lobby Albany and also put money into campaign contributions. What are trial lawyers getting in exchange for, or I don't want to say exchange because that's what gets people in trouble, but what are they getting as a return on their investment, if you will?
Well, they're making New York one of the lawsuit capital of the world, really. We spend more on lawsuits than just about anywhere else, not just in the United States, but in the world. We're one of the most litigious states in the most litigious country in the world. And for my members, getting sued is a risk. But for the trial lawyers, suing is their livelihood. It's how they eat. It's how they put food on the table. So they need to expand litigation. They need to expand liability for everybody. But for doctors and hospitals, for businesses and municipalities, for farmers, litigation is just a risk. It's a small part for teachers. It's just a small part of their overall legislative plan, mostly on the defensive side. But for the trial lawyers, they only really have one goal, and that's to expand liability.
Well, why not be able to make it easier for folks to say they've got a very legitimate medical malpractice claim that they want to make, or there's been an accident at a construction site? Why not
Sure.
make it easier for those folks to be able to claim some damages in a court of law?
Right, and one of the things the trial lawyers often say about me and my organization is that we're trying to prevent people from suing. Well, that's not true. If you have a legitimate case, if you have a legitimate complaint, by all means, sue, collect. That's the way the American jurisprudence should work. But what we need to do is raise the bar for litigation. We can't have phony experts in our courtrooms. We can't have statute of limitations that extend for 18 years. We can't have these kinds of things that expand litigation. But again, if you have a legitimate case, absolutely, you should collect, you should claim if someone's been negligent. But if you, for example, look at the scaffold law, the person doesn't even have to be negligent. The contractor or the property owner doesn't even have to be negligent in that case. That's the kind of law that the trial lawyers have really defended, those laws that expand liability to even parties that aren't necessarily responsible for the action.
Has there been anything that's been done in the last several weeks of this legislative session? We just got through the budget. Obviously, the scaffold law was something that a lot of folks were arguing on both sides. I remember going to those news conferences. Nothing really seemed to have changed, though, on the scaffold law. Was there any new bill that was passed this legislative session that really seemed to benefit the trial lawyers at all?
Well, right now we haven't seen anything because the conversation's really been dominated by the budget. But we have seen some introductions, say, on the asbestos front. And you'll recall that in Speaker Silver's indictment, asbestos was really at the center of the whole claim. Well, one of the things in that particular case, or in the asbestos litigation docket, is that you have an ability to sue both these asbestos trusts and in the tort system. And there's no transparency between the two actions. So we actually saw a bill introduced by Assemblyman Schimminger that would open up transparency so that people can't claim one thing against the trust and claim another thing against the tort system, which is currently the way it works in New York.
Well, that was one of the major pushes, I would say, on changing the scaffold law was actually from, I think, supporters of the scaffold law. They were trying to open up insurance companies to reveal more information on how much they're paying out. And ostensibly, this was done to show that the scaffold law is not necessarily hurting their bottom line all of that much.
Yeah, it was really kind of a red herring, because the challenge with the scaffold law is that most insurers won't write policies in New York. So most of the national insurers that carry policies everywhere else don't write policies in New York. So to say that these insurers need to open their books was a red herring, because those insurers aren't there. They're not even writing policies. And that's how bad it's gotten in New York, is that we have insurers that won't even write here. And we have rates that we know that are tracked, that are by the DFS and others, that are tracked at 2, 3, 4 times higher than the national average, and insurers still don't want to write policies.
A 27% increase over last year in lobbying expenditures for the trial lawyers' interests. Number one, what do you peg to the reason for why they're spending so much more money? Is it because of this growing debate over the scaffold law, which again has been kind of a perennial issue in Albany? And also, how do they stack up to some of the other deep-pocketed interests in town?
Well, they're one of the largest for sure, and the governor himself said in April that the trial lawyers are the single most powerful political force in Albany.
I think he said it's the teachers union, but that also depends on
he said
education reform too.
Yeah, but he said that about the trial lawyers in April, that they were the single most powerful, and that calculus may have changed now that Speaker Silver has been arrested and is no longer Speaker. But nevertheless, we see that the trial lawyers are continuing to spend, and I think that's because people are realizing that we spend so much on lawsuits and litigation, not just in the form of actually getting sued, but our taxes, because our schools and municipalities are sued so much. Our products and services, because so many of our businesses are sued all the time. And frankly, it's an issue of jobs as well. Companies often won't want to locate here because we're highest for litigation risk. So, we can say we're open for business, but really it's the courthouse that's open for business, and businesses are getting sued, and they don't want to come here to get sued. They want to come here to provide jobs and grow businesses.
Alrighty, we'll have to leave it there. Tom Stebbins of the Lawsuit Reform Alliance, thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.